Welcome to Nasdaq Trade Talks. I'm your host, Jill Malandrino, global markets reporter at Nasdaq. Joining at the market site, we have Richard Johnson. He's the principal of market structure and technology over at Greenwich Associates. We're going to take a look at the advantage of security tokens. Richard, it's great to have you back with me.
Great to be here.
As
Thanks.
always, and let's talk about that. Security tokens offered on the blockchain. Seen a lot of advantages there.
Yeah, well, I started looking at this around the end of the ICO boom when we realized that a lot of people were launching tokens on a blockchain that weren't compliant with securities regulations. So how do we solve that problem, and what's the solution? And it's going to be tokens that are compliant with securities laws. Mm-hmm. We know we've been talking about blockchain for a while. There are a lot of advantages to that, such as the immutable transaction record, the transparency, the shortened settlement time, and so forth. And I think the security tokens market is a new approach to that problem that has a lot of potential advantages.
Well, let's talk about liquidity and beyond, because that's always been a challenge with the blockchain. Yeah,
so I think what's different between security tokens and blockchain, what I'm kind of calling enterprise blockchain, is that we're really looking at different types of asset classes. So we're not talking about US equities that are traded here at the Nasdaq. We're talking about perhaps private placements or tokenizing other types of asset that are more illiquid. So the idea here is that you bring in the blockchain, which is you digitize the asset, you put smart contracts on top of it to automate a lot of the compliance functions, and now you're able to create some secondary market liquidity that wasn't there in the first place.
Right. Now, you can't have this conversation without addressing regulatory challenges.
Yes, yeah. So in the study that we did, we asked what are the main challenges to adoption of security tokens. The overwhelming, it's basically just the regulatory lack of regulatory oversight, rather, or guidance. I think it was like 2/3 of people said that was the biggest challenge. Certainly here in the US, there's been a much more conservative approach by the regulators. They're holding back on approving a lot of projects in the space, and they are also, obviously, as we've heard, cracking down on some of the other projects like Kik, which issued an ICO a couple of years ago, or a year and a half ago. So for now, we don't know how the industry is waiting for guidance. But I think if you look at what the existing regulations are, there is still a path you can carve out. So there are exemptions to the Securities Act, like Reg D, which does about $1.8 trillion a year in new issuances every year. That's massive. It's more than the IPO market. So if you're following those regulations, it should be possible to issue security tokens that are blockchain-based.
Right, because you don't want to fall behind either.
Well, that's it. You've got a lot of companies moving out of the US specifically because of this, or not wanting to do business in it, or structuring offshore entities. They're in the US, but they're structured offshore to get around this type of problem.
What about token security leaders? What are the big names in the space right now?
So essentially, a lot of different players in the space. You've got some exchanges getting into the space, some crypto exchanges, and some technology providers. So coming out top, in fact, in the study was Coinbase, who, not perhaps known for it, but they do have a lot of tokens on there, and they have bought 2 broker-dealers in the last year, so they're moving in that direction. SIX, which is a Swiss stock exchange, it was interesting that they came out so high because this was 50% US participants in the study, and they're obviously a European company. They are working on a digital exchange over there in Switzerland, and T0 is doing something very similar here with the Boston Options Exchange, or it's called Box Digital. So they were the kind of the 3 top leaders that people came out with, yeah.
So let's wrap it up here. Security tokens, they really do represent the latest innovation in cryptocurrency.
Latest innovation in crypto, but also in securities, because they're better than stock certificates and the system we have now in many cases.
Is it different than, for example, street name versus security tokens?
It can be. I think that's where we want to get to, because you'll have a record. So everyone, instead of having street name, is of course where you have your shares at Morgan Stanley, and it just shows up as Morgan Stanley. But you should be able to structure in a way such that it goes right down to Jill Malandrino, not just Morgan Stanley.
Interesting. Thank you so much, as always, for joining us. And thank you for joining me on Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, global markets reporter at Nasdaq.